Good to be here with you all. And let's start with a nigun. Yai, nai, 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 nai. Yai, nai, 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 nai. Yai, nai, 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 nai. Yai, nai. Yai, nai, 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 nai. Yai, nai, nai, nai. Ay, 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 ay. Yai, ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Yeah. What a pleasure to be all together and to prepare for Shabbat together. As Rabbi Mark already said, my name's Aaron, and I'm preparing for Shabbat here in Toronto. And I'm going to frame my teaching around the beloved Shabbat preparatory practice of lighting candles. And I'm also going to weave it into our Parsha this week. Thanks for dropping the source sheet in there with some text from the Parsha that can give us and help me share some of my kavanot, my intention around how I light Shabbat candles, that I think also have some spiritual takeaways that maybe we can bring into our sit together this afternoon. And as you see, maybe you can see in the dark behind me, I have my Shabbat candelabra, which will light at the end of a brief teaching. I'm going to just share my screen with you all. So you can see the text that I'm looking at. This week's Parsha, Beha'alotcha, starts with God speaking to Aaron, the high priest, saying some instructions for how to light the menorah that is in the Mishkan. And you can see the second pasuk of the Parsha here. And Rashi likes to ask this question of why are parshiot, why are sections in the Torah beside each other? So if anybody remembers what was happening at the end of the Parsha last week, at the end of Parshat Naso, we had this long extended section of hearing about the gifts that the Nisi'im, that the leaders of each of the 12 tribes brought for the Chanukat Mishkan, right, for the dedication of the tabernacle. And Rashi, in this first comment here, says that there was something that was a little bit hard for Aaron in this section, that he felt a little bit small and maybe not appreciated. Maybe I can share that I think when maybe these IGS sits were starting, when the pandemic was coming down a little bit more, I hopped on, and Rabbi Mark, you were giving the teaching about mochin de katnut, about more constricted and constrained mind, and mochin de gadlut, this mystical Hasidic idea of having more expanded consciousness. And that teaching stayed with me these years, and it's something that I refer to and notice in myself. And I think Aaron in this passage, as explained by Rashi, is experiencing some mochin de katnut, some constricted way of thinking. Oh, the tabernacle is my space, and who are these Nisi'im who are coming in and we're spending all this time noticing their gifts? What about my gifts? And how come my tribe isn't even represented? And also to reference Yiska Smith's teaching yesterday, which I tuned in to catch some of. Right, it's maybe the opposite of anava. Right, it's the opposite of not really such humble thinking. Instead of saying, "Oh, this isn't really about me," Rashi's saying, "Oh, Aaron's thinking, why isn't this more about me?" But to guide Aaron into thinking with more of a sense of expanded consciousness, with mochin de gadlut, the more expanded thinking. Hashem, the Holy Blessed One, says, I've got something great for you. It's the lighting of the menorah. That can help you somehow get out of this constricted mindset. And maybe that's also something we always need as we step into Shabbat. And we have all these things and worries and how come it didn't go the way that I wanted? How come attention was elsewhere? We light the Shabbat candles to bring in a sense of a more unified and expanded consciousness. And Rashi actually continues to explain something that I really appreciate about this way that the menorah was set up. There's, we may know, 7 lamps, unlike the Chanukiah, the menorah in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, had a central holder, which is referred to here as Pnei HaMenorah, the face or the central part of the menorah, with 3 branches on either side that feed into it. And Rashi explains that it needs to be that the 3 on the outside, the 3 candles on the outside, are oriented towards the inside. And when we imagine lighting with candles, it's a little bit hard because it's hard to orient candles. But the menorah was lit with oil. And when you have an oil holder, you need to you can choose where you're going to put the wick. So this is part of the reason that I started lighting my Shabbat candles, not just my Hanukkah candles, also my Shabbat candles with olive oil. And I can kind of point out to you here that you can see where the wicks are sticking out and you can orient them. And I particularly like to have this 3-branched Shabbat candle so that I can orient my 2 candles towards the center. But what's that all about? Orienting towards the center. This is perhaps a central idea in Judaism that's always reminding us to return to the sacred center, to return to, we might know from our practice, to return to our breath or our anchor. And as we prepare for Shabbat, it's also a reminder of turning our attention towards Shabbat. And this teaching from Joseph of Hamdan, a Kabbalistic thinker, talks about how the menorah is kind of a diagram of Shabbat and the week. He says that the central pillar of the menorah is Shabbat, and the 3 branches on one side he calls Motzei Shabbat, the conclusion of Shabbat. He says Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday are all kind of just the denouement from Shabbat. And Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah, that's right. And Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are called Erev Shabbat. So we spend half of the week preparing for Shabbat. We have Shabbat, and then we let Shabbat slowly take its time in having the afterglow slowly fade away. And this is what I hold with me when I light Shabbat candles. And maybe we'll light candles to start our sit in just a moment. And before we do, I'll share one last piece, which I've also included in my Shabbat candle lighting practice, which is a techina for candle lighting. So for those of you who know, techinas are vernacular prayers, mainly written by women, where it felt like there was a need for some extra prayers. And we have these beautiful collections and these beautiful prayers, including this one, which was written by Sarah Bas Tovin, in 1750. And this is a recently done print setting by my friend Noam Sienna. Um, and it imagines the person lighting the Shabbat candles, really in this case, the woman lighting the Shabbat candles, to imagine herself as Aharon Kohen, as the high priest, every Shabbat, doing this practice of bringing all of the things that might be distracting us, all of the hardness from the week, to see if we can return it to the one central source. So it says, a techenes for lichtbenchen, a prayer for blessing Shabbat candles. Master of the universe, may my act, I'm going to read it in English, and if somebody else knows the Yiddish, it would be great for you to explore and teach it to me. I'd love to learn how to say this in Yiddish one day. Master of the universe, may my act of lighting Shabbat candles be accepted as equivalent to the act of the high priest who lit the candles in the precious temple. As his act was accepted, so may mine be accepted. Ner leragli dvarecha ve'or leneti vati. Your words are a candle at my feet and a light for my path. This means that your words are a light at my feet so that all my family may walk in God's path. And may the act of my candlelighting be accepted so that my family's eyes are illuminated by the precious holy Torah. May the merit of the beloved Shabbat lights protect me, just as the beloved Shabbat protected the first primeval Adam, the first human. May we merit by lighting these candles to protect our family, that they may be enlightened by the study of Torah. May our acts be accepted as equivalent to the acts of our ancestors and the holy tribes of Israel, and that we may be as pure as a child, newly born of its mother. So with that, I'm going to stop the share, light my candles, and then we'll move into our sits. So I invite you to find a comfortable position where you can both notice your body relaxing, sinking into your seat or chair or whatever it is that's connecting you to the frame of the room, that's connecting you to the foundations that rest on the earth that holds us. And to also lift up your posture, to hold some gvura, some discipline as well, to imagine yourself being both held up and relaxed. Let's take a collective breath here. And we will have 10 minutes of quiet singing before we will conclude with Mourner's Kaddish. So lovely to sit together.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for that beautiful, beautiful practice to help us segueing into Shabbat. And friends, let's seal the practice as we do each day. Those of you who are in mourning, observing a yard site, or if it's your custom for joining reciting Kaddish, you're welcome to do so and put the name or names of those you're remembering and honoring today in the chat. If you're not reciting Kaddish, we ask you please stay present for those who are, offer your passionate support in their time of loss.
No,
Thanks
we don't
to
need them.
Natalie for sharing the words on the screen. And if you're reciting Kaddish, please join me by rising in body or in spirit, and you can unmute.
Gadal,
Yitkadal, V'kadash, Mirabah, Yama, Dibra, Kute, Yikma, Kute, Yekon, Yekon, Kukaye, Israel, Hagalah, Uzman, Shmei Rabba Torah Olam Ramei Torah Barak V'Pa'al V'Kamam V'Yifet Halal V'Yishach V'Yifu V'Ila Mikol Birkadecha Shbechata Shbechata V'Nekamata Da'amiran Da'alma V'Yinu V'Yinu Yehi Shlama Rabba Ben Shemaya Haim Aleinu V'Yisrael Shulu Amen Oseh Shalom B'Mamav Ru Oseh Shalom Aleinu V'Yisrael Kol Yoshvei Tevel B'Ru Amen.
Shalom b'mamav, kuya asay shalom. Aleinu b'Kol Yisrael.
So much for being here, everyone. If you're leaving us now, I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi Jenny Solomon will be here on Monday to lead off a beautiful week of practice. Next week, we'll be meeting Monday through Friday, so please join us then sometime soon. And just wish you a sweet and restorative Shabbat, hopefully inspired by today's teaching and practice. And if you're staying on, you're welcome just to continue to sit with that image of gathering the light towards the center, and bring up your volume on your device and just sit with us, or join us for conversation with Aaron about teaching and practice. And of course, if you have a question, please put in the chat and preface it by writing question in all caps, and we'll help me keep an eye on that. Oh, this is an interesting question. All right, Aaron, first of all, thank you so much. Pastor Koach, really wonderful to have you aboard, and really just appreciated your presence and teaching so much. And thank you for that nice little shout out also. That's very touched by that. First of all, I really, I love that we did something that was Shabbat related on these Friday sits, which I always like to orient toward Shabbat. I had never seen that text or heard that idea, that conception of framing of bookending Shabbat with the 3 days before and the 3 days after. I guess I've heard that, you can make Havdalah until Tuesday, and I guess that's related to this, but I had not really heard that. So I really appreciated that. So Ron is asking the question, it's an interesting question, hadn't occurred to me, but it's an interesting question. If 3 days leading into Shabbat and 3 days coming out of Shabbat, is that necessarily a better thing? Doesn't that dilute the sacredness of Shabbat? So I haven't answered that question, but let's start with you. How would you respond to that? Does it dilute Shabbat to have the whole days of whole, the profane or mundane days related to Shabbat?
Yeah, I love this question. And it feels like it gets at something that feels a little bit perhaps tricky, or sometimes feels like perhaps a paradox in
Mhm.
Judaism of wanting to hold things that are holy. And by doing that through creating separation. And to me, this feels connected to this idea
Mhm.
of permeable membranes. This is like Reb Zalman's famous framing around this. But I think we do need to have respectful and honoring boundaries. So I think for Shabbat, we do have that in beautiful ways. The Kabbalat Shabbat that really like says, okay, now we're getting into Shabbat, and Havdalah, which does let out Shabbat. And so I think that those boundaries are important for holding Shabbat. And I think that part of the idea of Shabbat is that it seeps into the rest of the week. And I
Mhm.
think it's really meaningful to find ways that I don't think dilute, that I think like if it's held well, it doesn't dilute it, but perhaps like candles, just spreads it further. And I think maybe to me this is what I think Shabbat is, or Judaism and Shabbat are all of our many Jewish practices are trying to point us to be able to hold something really well and then let it expand outward. Maybe just the last thing on this, right, is that even this idea of God, right, that we have, right, how do we understand, like, isn't God everywhere all the time? How do we even like relate to God?
Mhm.
Sometimes it's very helpful for us to have containers, to have afternoon sits, to have like moments that can help connect us. But then there is an afterglow and a preparation that comes and lets the godliness expand out further.
That's just beautifully said, and I think that's exactly what we're doing here every day. Basically, I our CEO and President Josh Davidson at some point this year is just talking about Jewish mindfulness practice as microdosing Shabbat over the course of the day, and this idea
Mhm.
of infusing the other days of the week with Shabbat, which without diluting or diminishing the holiness of Shabbat, just exactly as you're describing, I think is exactly what Jewish mindfulness practice aspires to do, to kind of infuse every moment of week with Shabbat consciousness, even when we're not in Shabbat, and to do a deep immersion into that on Shabbat, just how you described it. So that's beautiful. Um, um, Lori's asking, did I notice that you lit the side candles and then the central candle? What are your thoughts about the side candles representing the shards of ceramic glass, I guess that we coat of our own parts, and the souls of community in the world coming together in the whole of the divine, the central candle, which my next question for you was really going to be about that, just to be really practical about it. When you're lighting, I love that candelabrum. When you're lighting it and the idea of orienting towards the center, I mean, everyone can make their own midrash, your own interpretation of what it means for you, Lori. So you can come up. That's a good one. So I'm wondering for you, what is in your mind and in your heart when you're doing? What does the center represent? What are the wings of the candelabra or the menorah represent for you when you're engaging in that practice?
To be honest, I'm still developing this
Mm-hmm.
practice. So
Mm-hmm.
it also feels exciting to be
Mm-hmm.
sharing and working it out with all of you.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's also shifting. And I feel like I appreciate the specificity and the noticing in this question. That's actually making me think, maybe there is a different way to do it. And I think I just lit the way I light my Hanukkah candles of like in a row.
Oh,
But it,
yeah. Mhm.
of course, like if I'm setting up this whole intention of the two or the candles on the edge, then bringing somehow filtering into the middle, maybe first the outer candles and then the middle candle. That feels right to me. Maybe that's what I'll do when I light them this Shabbat.
I like that too. I have a Hanukkah. This happens to be my father, would have been my father's birthday today. So I'm thinking about that. Really, one of the precious things I have is a Hanukkah, which does have the shamash candle in the middle like that. And it never occurred to me, I never, even though the store portion is very powerful, particularly powerful one in my family, I never really had thought about it that way. Um, well, let's think about it. So, um, you know, Lori was can play around with the idea of Lori. I think you're suggesting that these uh, the days before and after represented by the candles represent kind of the the 6 days of the week are the kind of broken reality in which we live that are also full of hidden holiness, and that Shabbat is the day of pure holiness. It's like where things are intact in some way, and so it's kind of a people are usually familiar with the phrase "tikkun olam," repair of the world, which comes from Jewish mysticism about the idea, which has this idea of kind of collecting the scattered sparks. So maybe that's just going to offer that one up. It's a moment of let me collect myself, collect, the just throw this in, and then I want to hear what you think about this, Aaron. Also, like there's the ritual of collecting the corners of the talit, the tzitzit, into one when we do the Shema. Is also similar. It's a process. It's a practice for collecting into one, into something singular. What do you think? I also want to hear about your camp, by the way. I want to get to that too, because
I'm also happy to share about that.
okay.
But yeah, that idea sounds right to me, that it's a sort of collecting of the week with an element of raising it up,
Mm-hmm.
bringing it into Shabbat, right? Because I think that in this setup that I'm framing, right, the
Mm-hmm.
things on the edge represent the 6 days of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Shabbat isn't saying, oh, we're like totally throwing those aside. It's something about appreciating and elevating that necessary work in the realm of Shabbat.
And that they're in relationship, that everything is in relationship and connected in some way. And we haven't even gotten into the Kabbalistic weeds here about what the center represents in the tree of life. But the text that you offered, I don't want to do that right now, but maybe sometime we will do that. But I was thinking as I was sitting, imagining the spine or the heart, the central part of the body as that orientation. So I was paying some special attention to orient my different parts of my body towards that center line in some way. I don't know if you
Yes,
intended that, but that's where I went.
not to get into the weeds of that, but it is interesting that that Kabbalistic text had the center as Yisod, which
You
is
sewed, right? I saw that.
and not Malchut, which is usually what Shabbat, or we might more
Right.
often consider the Shabbat mode.
All right. That's enough weed whacking there. So yeah. All right. So one more question, and then let's take a couple of minutes. Really, I'm curious to hear about curious to learn more about you in general, but also about this camp. So Mira asked the question, said, I love the concept of Shabbat being in the center, not at the end of the week. Sometimes I need Shabbat earlier, Tuesday. I mean, we kind of have dealt with this a little bit. Sometimes I need Shabbat earlier, like Tuesday or Wednesday. Any suggestions? Um,
Mm.
uh, I kind of feel like we answer that by saying, like, yes, if you notice that you need Shabbat in a moment, in any given moment over the course of the week, you say, oh, Shabbat is actually available. You don't have to wait until Shabbat. You can have a Shabbat moment right now that hopefully draws upon the resources and like the well that you've dug by having a Shabbat practice that reminds, like, yeah, just right now, like this this practice each practice of the week. So I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that, but I think it's important to remember that Shabbat is always available, no to wait.
Yeah. I think I also want to shout out or mention my teacher, Rabbi Elliot Ginsberg, who
Mm.
first time introduced this framework of Shabbat, this mystical Jewish idea of Shabbat being at the middle of the week instead of the culmination of the week, which is often how we think about it. But one of the
Mhm.
things that I think, or there are various Kabbalistic practices that Reb Elliot has mentioned to me of people who are who like, mystics that try to do 4 hours of Shabbat every day. Okay, so that's probably a little bit intense. But I think that what I hear you saying, Rabbi Mark, feels like the same sort of thing. You can have a little Shabbat in just a breath that you pay attention to during your day. Or, even better, if you can like have a daily sit, there are lots of ways to bring Shabbat in. And you might think for yourself of what is the special thing about Shabbat for me. Maybe it's like a delicious food, and to have a delicious food and like bring in some Shabbat energy during the week too. I don't think dilutes it. I think
Yes,
it elevates.
right. That's good. Or start shopping for Shabbat. Okay, so we have just a couple of minutes. What can you tell us about Heart to Heart, which is described as a society building summer camp program for Jewish and Palestinian teens?
Yeah, so
Tell us about it. I mean, is that happening this summer? Tell us about it.
it's happening in a different mode this summer. We usually bring 15-year-olds who all are in the uh, Triangle region in northern Israel. So it's all teens who are citizens of Israel who live very close to each other.
Mhm.
Um, if you're familiar with that area, the Mishulash area or Wadi Ara, there's a lot of different kibbutzim and towns and villages where there are Jews and Palestinians just living in separate towns in separate ways. And we are part of a many-pronged approach to try to bring more integration and dialogue and understanding between those communities that are close to each other geographically, but separated for many reasons in society. And especially in these days, there's a lot of uh, difficulty in separation. We work with we have a intensive time in Camp Shomria near Perth, near Ottawa here in Canada, where we bring the participants for a month and we then continue to work with them over the year and have ongoing alumni programs. So we've been doing this program for around 12 years. We have a lot of alumni we've worked with. And our sense for this year was that it would be hard to bring in a new cohort of 15-year-olds. So we are moving forward with an alumni fellowship of leadership and healing to bring back folks that have been doing this work with us for many years, who've been experiencing a lot of hard things, to come back together and have some time for healing and rest and reflection, and to think about what's needed for moving forward. So we're going to be
That'll be in person at the camp.
yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, that is needless to say, really holy work these days. So thank you for doing that and lifting it up and putting the light in so many ways as you did today. So, such a all right, Aaron, we're at time. I want to thank you and be lovely to have you back. The acclamation. People are thrilled to have you here today. So thank you so much for leading us so skillfully and wisely and gently through the Shabbat time where we really need that. See, people are, I don't know if you can see the chat. Natalie Rushinoff, thank you so much for holding our space today. Aaron, thanks for leading us. Thanks to each of you for being here. Sweet and restorative Shabbat to all as we orient ourselves. Hopefully today's practice lays a nice groundwork for our practice of lighting Shabbat candles tonight. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Many blessings. And thanks again.